Time doesn't erase murder. It just hides it better. They said the case was closed. They said no one was watching. But someone always is. This is Santana True Crime.
Welcome to Santana True Crime. Tonight, we're covering what may be the most surprising development in the Bryan Kohberger case since he pleaded guilty. Over the weekend, Kohberger not only filed a motion seeking to withdraw his guilty plea under the Sixth Amendment, claiming ineffective assistance of counsel, but he also sent a statement to the New York Times declaring that he is actually innocent. In that statement, Kohberger described the state's case as a, quote, work of fiction, claims his guilty plea was a product of false promises and misinformation, and says he intends to plead not guilty if given the opportunity. Perhaps most remarkably, he writes that he welcomes prosecutors to once again pursue the death penalty. Now, before we go any further, it's important to separate the legal realities from the headlines. Motions like this are extremely difficult to win. Once a defendant pleads guilty in open court and a sentence, courts are generally reluctant to allow that plea to be withdrawn absent compelling evidence of a constitutional violation. But what fascinates me isn't just the legal filing, it's the decision-making behind it. Think about where Bryan Kohberger is today. He has now spent years in jail and prison, much of that time in highly restrictive conditions. Whatever expectations he may have had about pleading guilty and serving life in prison, the reality of incarceration is something no one fully understands until you're living in it every day. I'm not suggesting that's why I filed this motion. We simply do not know his motives. But when someone is willing to risk putting or being put to death back on the table and accepting a plea to remove that possibility, it raises important questions about how they're evaluating risk and if they believe their chances are and how they see their future. Tonight, I've got with me Dr. Bryan Santana. We are going to examine the actual legal claims, discuss why the odds of a new trial remain very low, and explore what this filing and Kohberger, his own words, may tell us about his thinking and this stage of the case. Dr. Bryan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here talking about this interesting development. I think for me, you kind of hit on something that I think is worth emphasizing. We have waited a long time to hear Bryan Kohberger say something. Do you remember towards the end of this trial when part of the outrage that came from the plea agreement from some members of the victim's family was that Kohberger was not required as part of the plea bargain to offer any account of himself or to really kind of offer any explanation. And it's interesting that with this filing, I think you hit it right on the head. Like the filing itself, in some ways, I mean, this is not going to amount to anything,
right?
But it's fascinating that this is an opportunity that Kohberger is a way that he is speaking after such a long silence, including his trial. The trial was his opportunity to speak.
Right. So, and that's what the public, and I've heard the victim's family say this as well, that they were actually hoping that this would go to trial in a way because they wanted answers. And no one, like you said before, no one had heard from him. And we were expecting some type of motive or explanation to why he targeted the four victims. That was one of the big questions.
Right.
And unfortunately, from what I've heard, is that, yes, there are those cases like BTK, Dennis Rader, where Dennis Rader stood before the court and walked the judge through every one of his heinous crimes and gave details. I remember he referred to them as his cases. I believe he was the term
so creepy.
But yes, I mean, he was very cold, but extremely confident in what he had done, right? And that's
Right.
something that I think the expectation was, especially of how hyped up this was. People had been waiting a very long time. As soon as he had been uh, arrested,
Mhm.
shortly after that, book started to come out on this case.
Right.
This is
Really fast, some of those early books.
right.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, like this was a letdown when the prosecution did not require him to give those details. But at the same time,
Yeah.
if you look at what the prosecution got, they got
Mhm.
everything except for that. And if
Right.
your goal is to make sure that this case is not lost because of some technicality, or that you get a bad jury, or you
Mhm.
get that juror that does not want to put him to death because
Right.
of moral issues,
Yeah.
it takes away all that.
That was literally his only shot at trial. His only shot at trial was to have some wacko jury member who was against the death penalty and did not want to send him to the firing squad, which is what we're going to get and what we would have gotten in Idaho.
Yes.
I think that was his very best shot. And something I think is interesting about the trial that I'd also like to remind people of is that Kohberger waived his right to a speedy trial at the beginning of the process, and they filed flurries of motions throughout the early stages that were really just seemed designed just to create as much distance and time between the actual act and the commencement of the trial itself. I mean, he had exhausted so many filings. So eventually, I wasn't even sure if the trial was actually going to take place. It feels me years before it actually took place. And we finally get there. So this is not like a rush to judgment, is what I'm saying. Like this was a very long period of time before the trial. And then we finally get there, and he is not only not offering some kind of affirmative kind of defense, he then also doesn't really speak out ever about any of these kinds of issues, and even goes before the judge and swears by his own volition many times that he under no coercion or threat, he understood what he was pleading to and he wanted to plead guilty. And so
And I remember watching that and thinking, okay, the judge is being very detailed,
yeah,
and he's getting him in every which way to admit that he's guilty without providing detail, right? Like
right.
I thought that those bases were covered. Um, but again, I had that thought in my head that I did not see him just letting this go,
No.
because he really is an attention whore. And I
Right.
think that that is the reason why he prolonged this as well too, and why he is ultimately doing this right now is because everyone's not talking about him. Life moves on. Nancy Guthrie is in the news.
Right.
Long Island serial killers in the news. I wouldn't say people have forgotten about this case,
Mhm.
but he's not in the headlines anymore.
That's a great point. And I think if you think about Kohberger, that there is this, he's not in the headlines anymore, like you said. And the fact that he sends this note to the New York Times as well, that's a very public facing statement, is just going beyond just his legal filings. Something that I think is really fascinating about like all this is, I read one article in preparation for today where the newspaper reporter was describing a kind of cult following that Kohberger has developed, right? Like amongst there's certain people who, like with Richard Allen and Delphi, for whatever reason, have just decided that they don't believe, they think this is some kind of conspiracy. He's not guilty. So Kohberger's been sitting in jail for a while, as you mentioned. And this reporter hinted that it's almost like he's been so closed off from reality for so long that he heard about or found out about that there are these like internet fan groups and people that think that he's not guilty. And it's almost like he's playing to them. Now, I don't know if I completely agree with that, but it seems like at least a dimension of what he's doing, that there's this thing where he's like playing for the attention.
Well, and he spent his entire time in solitary confinement,
Right.
because there's been multiple complaints about the conditions that he was complaining about and of how he was being harassed. And they were threatening to do sexual acts to him as soon as he is released. And they were flooding and doing it through the pipes. So they had,
Right.
so he's hearing these things and not allowing him to sleep and flooding his cell with the toilet water. Like they've figured out ways to do all this stuff. So
Yeah,
he is not living his best life,
No,
which
it
good.
sucks.
Like
Yeah.
this
No, he
is
deserves it.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I have zero sympathy for him, and
None.
I'm glad that they're doing that to him.
Yeah.
I would buy those guys some commissary if I knew who they were. Let's talk about this this note to the New York Times. We can go through it. I've got it up on the screen for those that are listening. Over a year later, it is self-evident that in State versus Kohberger, I want to start off
stop
with
right
that
there.
Yes.
Let's stop with self-evident. Like, so if something is self-evident, it is so incredibly obvious, it's almost not even worth pointing out. And here's the thing. I know I've heard about these online groups that there's some people online that like are spreading these conspiracy theories, these innocent stuff, but I've never actually met someone in real life who like believe that. And so this idea that somehow like self-evident, like every person on the planet thinks he's guilty. I don't know of anyone who's like, that real injustice that happened in Idaho with Bryan Kohberger. I've never even heard of that, like coming from anyone, like even any kind of major conspiracy outlets. Like I've just seen stuff pop up occasionally on social media.
Right. And I think that the wording is, I'm not an expert in this. We're going to try to get someone on to go through this if I can get him on. But I think that just the initial language of how it appears that he is trying to make himself more important than he actually is. Right. And he wants this, again, this is like an instant message or an email to a New York Times reporter that he has a contact with. Okay.
Yeah.
And he starts it out with, over a year later, it is self-evident that in State versus Kohberger, justice was not served. Unanswered questions seem to multiply with each piece of discovery unsealed, and the public demands a truth. And it's like he's acting like the public gives a shit about this case anymore. I don't think there's any question that he did it.
And this idea of demanding the truth, first of all, no one's demanding that, but also that, like, I think if anything, the justice that whenever justice does come up in this case, it's a miracle that he's not in front of a firing squad. It's like what actually happens. Like that seems like that would have been more justice than what was actually served, but not the way he's describing it. But also this idea of unanswered questions seem to multiply. It's like, that's literally what a trial is for. It's like, why did you accept a guilty plea? If you feel like there's all these unanswered questions, that's like, it's so mind-bogglingly crazy that, like, why would you circumvent the process, like, and not allow that, I mean, to borrow his word, circumnavigate. Why would you go around that process and not allow that, like, you didn't have the opportunity to contest the evidence because you decided you wanted to plead guilty.
Right. Yeah, and by the way, that's a good point about the firing squad. How Idaho actually built an execution chamber now for firing squad after they were having so many debacles with lethal injection, and so they're ready to go with this.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I've got a feeling that this is brand new too. I believe they started to construct it in 2004. Let me check.
That sounds about right.
In February 2004 is when they had a boxed an execution that went bad because they couldn't find an IV. And after that, that's when they decided to go to the firing squad. And so they had a pause in executions until actually this year. So they're now, yes, they are ready to go. They take volunteers to do this. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that there's a bunch of cops that would love to shoot this guy in the face.
Yeah,
Just
I don't think there would be a problem with that. It- yeah, this thing is this is such like a weird, just like disconnected from reality statement. This idea of it, just going to the next sentence. Unfortunately, the truth shall never be derived from the state's myopic narrative of work of fiction that is yet to evolve since the PCA was released nearly four years ago, and its faulty premises were never challenged at trial. Let me just remind again, it was never challenged at trial because you chose not to go to trial, right? You waived your right to an appeal. You waived your right to, like, you didn't want a trial.
right. Well, and again, you're using words like myopic narrative
Yeah.
in a text message, and I know he's got his PhD and you've got one too, but is that the type of language that you would be using if you were just communicating with someone over text?
No, and I'll tell you another problem with this. And I heard this. This was pointed out by a different commentator, but I think is worth kind of bringing up too. I've heard it said before, and this wasn't unique to this person. That one of the other issues is that if Kohberger is essentially, you can't have it both ways. You can't basically say you were taken advantage of by your attorney, and that you were essentially asked to plead in a particular way or pressured into it, while you're also presenting yourself as someone who's very sophisticated and is skilled with language and uses big words and has a very strong understanding of the law, or has these lofty aspirations for truth. And that, combined with just his background, he had a criminal justice master's degree, I believe. He has studied with a famed FBI profiler. He was working on a PhD in criminal justice. You don't really look like an incompetent person who's not capable of just recognizing that your attorney is I don't know, and completely inept. He seems uniquely positioned to be able to evaluate that.
Right. And again, I know we've said this before, but all those questions were asked by the judge.
Right. Yeah.
They asked him, was he made any promises, etc. All that stuff was covered.
Mhm.
So he's essentially going back and saying that he lied during that time, or he didn't what he didn't understand. But let's continue.
Okay.
Circumnavigated by a broken plea, the new trial never provided the public the clarity conductive to closure and these are small. Clarity conductive to closure and justice shall remain objectively miscarried unless a plea is withdrawn. So, yeah, I don't think that that people are going to get closure by flipping around this plea agreement. And it's kind of the same thing of just this wordy way of trying to make himself seem important to people and trying to make people care about this case more. And I feel like, you know what, your moment in the spotlight's gone.
Mm-hmm.
You had your opportunity to have a trial. You could have taken the stand,
Right.
and made an ass out of yourself there, but you decided not to. And I may get some shit for this, but he kind of took the coward's way out.
Yeah.
He didn't want to face anyone. He didn't want to face questions from the prosecutor. So instead, he just threw in the towel and decided to take a life sentence.
And which also waives his rights to all future appeals.
Right.
And he said at least a dozen times that he understood what he was pleading to, and I believe him. He did understand that. And I think that he took that because he realized that this was he didn't want the firing squad. And I think that then I mean the irony is that had he gone to trial, and let's say he's sentenced to death, if he was sentenced to death, he's gonna be stuck in jail for a very long time. likely,
Right.
right? He'd have access to more resources. He probably would have gotten more media attention because every time his death sentence or warrant is issued and it like they start getting closer to it and a flurry of motions are filed for delays or stays or whatever, then that would have probably brought him more attention. But once you close the book on appeals and everything and you're just kind of stuck in jail, which is not particularly glamorous, federal prison, and he's a vegan and wants organic foods and has sensitive like stomach and to gluten allergies and stuff. It's like, and he's not getting that, right? And so it
Yeah,
doesn't
that's
feel.
not the place to have a gluten allergy.
Yeah, no, and so it's one of those things where I don't think he's getting the attention he wants. And really the only card he has left to play outside this is no one has done a full sat down with him. And I think he's going to hold on to that card for as long as possible when he speaks for the first time. That's going to be really big news for a short period of time. Right.
Yeah, and I just don't know of how that would work. I mean,
Yeah.
is he going to speak with law enforcement? Is he going to just send a confession to the New York Times, or is this going to be uh, a made-up narrative
Mhm.
that, which I hope no one would actually publish that stuff.
I mean, I wouldn't be
It's
surprised if he's like writing a book in prison or doing something like if he's setting, but it's like, what is he going to do? He's got a lot of time left. He's a fairly young guy. It's like, what is
and
he going
he's
to do?
in solitary confinement.
He's in solitary confinement. You've seen the videos of Charles Manson after he had been like in prison for a really long time? Like in the 1980s, he's still speaking like it's the early 1960s and stuff, the way he
Right.
communicates and talks. And I think that's what happens. And I think that for some of these guys that already, with people like Kohberger that have mental instabilities already and are narcissists, it doesn't probably do them any good to just be stuck in their own head of all places. It's a terrible place to, be stuck for them. And so, because it does create, to use his words, a myopic vision of yourself, and you begin to take on a greater sense of self-importance, or you believe that people actually might buy what you're saying. And so it's
Yeah, and about self-importance, let's go to this part where he says, "I hereby
mhm.
declare my intention to enter a not guilty plea and welcome the state the opportunity to prove their case at trial, as well as to again file for the death penalty." And it's like he's a this whole narrative of making himself important is in
Mhm.
there, but I guess his only card is to try to bait the state into uh, giving him the death penalty or putting that back on the table.
I don't know. I don't know what this is because he already had that up. I don't know what's changed for him. Because he's already had that opportunity. And so to prove the case at trial, it's like you told the judge again and again, you didn't want to go to trial. You did it and you were okay with waiving your appeals. And so, um, yeah, it's like that's past. And I do feel like part of this is just for show because when the death penalty was actually under consideration, he seemed to retreat really quickly.
Right.
Now that he's just there, like nothing's going to change the fact that he's just stuck in prison for the rest of his life doing, whatever it is he does in solitary right now. Um, it it's more of like an abstract thing. Oh, I want to go back and I want to go back and you know, prove my innocence. I want to go. Even the death penalty can be on the table. It's like that's a safe place to be when you know that that's not an actual possibility.
Right. No, exactly. I'll continue on. He says, "My actual innocence is my truth,
Hmm.
and the plea hinged on by false promises and blatant disinformation must be withdrawn. Thank you for all who believe in my innocence," which is no one, "and continue to critically analyze the case. I send my love to my family who have never wavered in their belief in who I am, their belief in my innocence."
I don't believe that's actually possible. I don't believe there might have been a degree of shock, but I don't believe that last part about never wavered in their thing. I think they're pretty certain. They know he's guilty. I think the questions they're likely asking themselves are probably otherwise. Um, the idea though, the sentence before that you were reading, before the last one, about where he was addressing his audience. I feel like that's a key sentence in this entire
Right.
thing as well. For the people who are he says something like critically analyzing this or something. It sounds like he heard about someone online or some AI bot online that was spreading essentially misinformation about this case, and he thought like, oh, like there's actually people out there who think I'm innocent. Like he's got an audience to perform for, and I wonder if that's a tell of who he imagines that audience to be, because I don't get the sense that he would have to be very delusional to believe that the average person is walking around and feels like there was some deep miscarriage of justice in this case. I've never heard anyone say that, any commentator. And
Right.
so, like I said, the only commentaries I've heard about about misjustice in this case was that he didn't have to actually answer at all for this, and he took the easy way out by basically refusing to speak and doing this plea agreement. But that's it. That's all I've heard.
Yeah, and we'll go through his affidavit, but you're absolutely right. I mean, nothing he there's nothing credible about this. And again, I don't want to be disproportionate when I say that this is not going anywhere. This is looking at these files are more
Mhm,
about who he is as a person, what
mhm,
type of life he is living right now, and kind of his mental state, than it is a question of will this actually be approved or not.
mhm.
I don't see that happening at all. We're looking at like slim to none for him to
Right.
actually get this another trial.
I mean, yeah, this is like you have a better chance of getting struck by lightning
Right.
twice in one day. So,
Yeah.
it was, this is going absolutely nowhere. And so, but he was successful in making the news again today. People were talking about him again today. So,
Right. And if that is his goal, then yeah, then that's a success. But I mean, just looking at this looks like a little kid wrote
mhm,
this. For those that are listening, this is his handwritten affidavit.
yeah.
And we'll go through this. It's sloppy handwriting, so I've got it blown up. It says, "It is hereby declared." Again, we've got this hereby declared stuff in there. "It is hereby declared that during attorney client discussions,
Mhm,
most of which included all members of Bryan C. Kohberger's immediate family, petitioner was convinced to falsely confess to capital murder and felony burglary by coercion, disinformation, false promises, and the withholding of exculpatory discovery. The following is material to the inception of the plea." So, one of the things I found odd about this is
mhm,
that he mentions that his immediate family
yeah.
was in the room when they were having this discussion.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that's true or not. That just seems odd to me.
It seems odd to me too. It also seems odd the idea like, I mean, when with false promises, they said like it. What the thing that's so unclear about this is a very poorly written document too. But like, what essentially is the false promise he's even claiming? Because I mean, and how would pleading guilty and waiving your right to an appeal ever sound like sound like a better like what was the promise? I mean, the
Right.
promise is like you'll stay in jail for the rest of your life and they'll never be able to execute you. I mean, what else could you promise? Like, I don't know
Yeah.
what this other promise would be. But it's a weird, but also like I think it's important for everybody to keep in mind, like that he's also not like your average regular guy. He's studying for a PhD. He teaches university level classes. He is engaged in advanced research. He's not someone who an incompetent person in the sense that he just really just didn't understand what was happening. I mean, this is literally what he studies.
Right. And that's a good point. And he had already been deemed fit for trial. Like
Yeah.
that had already been decided. And when it comes to his defense team, part of the law is they're not allowed to give you someone right out of law school. They have to give you someone with experience in
Right.
capital cases.
Yeah.
So that's not a question either.
Yeah. And his attorneys were actually quite good. They had good reputations. And I mean, what are you supposed to do? The exculpatory evidence, let's just be clear. I think he talks about this later. One of the victims had some hairs that were not conclusively identified. That's the thing, right? I'm sure that's true. But so what? So
Well,
what does that mean? We don't know where those hairs came from. You know, it wasn't like if you were not made aware of, like, that's not exculpatory evidence. If you think about the Delphi case, one of the poor girls had some DNA and hairs that did not belong to Richard Allen. Oh, where did these belong to the actual perpetrator? And they test them and they belong to someone in her family, her sister. It was like, okay.
right.
So it's like people that
about that line, sorry to cut you off, but this
Yeah.
is just ridiculous that during discovery, that is one of the items that was listed.
Yeah.
And so during the whole guilty phase where the judge is asking him 100 ways to make sure that he is guilty, that's one of the questions that he asked was,
Right.
have you been able to go through the evidence with your lawyer?
Mm-hmm.
And that piece of evidence was on the discovery sheet. So it's
Yeah.
not like he's trying to portray it like this is some new evidence, and it's not. On there,
Right.
it's listed as debris in the hand of Ethan.
And I want to be as respectful as possible in the way I try to phrase this so it doesn't come across the wrong way. But I remember being a college student. When you're a college student, you're living in a house or you're living in a room with other people. They're having parties, people crash. You're coming in contact with lots of people.
Right.
You know, maybe you're playing ping pong that night. Maybe you're doing, maybe you're having drinks or whatever. Like this was a house that people regularly gathered at to socialize. Like I would be shocked if people didn't have trace DNA or things that would produce DNA samples on them from lots of different individuals. And I'm not talking about any particular time. I'm just talking about just normal everyday contact.
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely. I completely agree. All right, we're going to move on. So his first point was counsel's failure to inform petitioner of its exculpatory discovery received during plea discussions, namely, we talked about this, the clumps of hair.
Mm-hmm.
He claims that that's a further injury. And again, that's a bunch of BS. The next one, he says, petitioner was convinced that actual guilt was not an important factor in considering plea acceptance. Death row was imminent and advised to lie. Petitioner was to gain a, quote, legal victory in entering a false plea.
That's such crap. That's the weirdest logic I've ever heard. And for someone that's trying to sound really smart, that's such a stupid thing to say.
Right.
The death penalty was imminent and you were advised that it was better to plead guilty even if you didn't do it. Like that does not make any sense. And he should know better than that.
Right. And I want to make that point again. This is someone that is studying to be have a PhD in criminal justice, and he already has his master's degree, and he's teaching college level classes.
College level criminal justice classes. He's teaching about the criminal justice system to 18, 19-year-olds.
Yeah. So we're not going to agree with him on that one. Point number 3, gross misrepresentation of and promises regarding what a life sentence would immediately afford petitioner, and a gross misrepresentation of death row in Idaho, including an elaborate fabricated story of counsel's horrific experience touring an actual 6 by 8 death row cell, all communicated to petitioner and his family, allegedly by IDOC through counsel, thus constituting threats and promises made to induce a plea agreement.
Yeah, right. It's like let's just play. I think that's not even a really convincing lie, but let's just play along for just one moment and just pretend that that's 100% true what the lawyer said. Even then, who cares? What your lawyer said, it sucks to live in a 6 by 8 cell. And so you really don't want to do that. It'd be better to have life in prison. And then you get there and you're like, wow, these death row cells don't look as bad as I thought, or this or that. Like, who cares? That's not anything that's material in this discussion whatsoever. Certainly about like invalidating a plea agreement that he entered into voluntarily.
Yeah, and that is
You're misled about what I mean. It sounds like he's almost saying like he was misled about like what he thought life in prison would look like, and now he's like a
right.
year in, and it really sucks. It's a lot worse than what people said it would be.
And that's what's funny about the kind of the buyer's regret that he's having
Right.
is that what was his expectations in this? Not to mention, it's not like he had never spent a day in a cell
Right.
before agreeing to this.
Right.
He had been in jail / a prison because they would not give him a bond for, I believe, over a year.
Yeah.
Until this even happened. So he had already spent a year in solitary confinement because of the threat to injury if they would have released him into general population. So he's kept in a cell by himself. He knows what that experience is going to be like, but yet he agrees to spend the rest of his life there.
Yeah. And yeah, it's he agreed to spend the rest of his life there because he was falsely led to believe that basically his life was going to look terrible if he was on death row. It's like, guess what? Your life's not going to look good no matter what. So
Right.
you're going to death row and you'll have some temporary benefits, but a firing squad's in your future with Idaho's death penalty, or you live the rest of your life in prison, and that doesn't seem too great either. He wasn't going to have there's not going to be a situation where he was going to be happy at the end of this.
Right. And I could see something where his lawyer may have told him that, look, you're not going to win this thing,
Right.
or it's very unlikely that you win this case, and it's
Right.
very likely that you're going to get the death penalty.
Yeah.
And so your best option is a life sentence, and maybe she gave the pros of a life sentence. I don't know. But that's normally their job when they have these capital cases, is to make sure that their client isn't executed. That seems to be their silver lining.
And what did she make that determination based on? Let's circle back to that. His attorney.
I'm sure it's the information that she had about this case.
That came about when?
Well, it came about during discovery and her conversations with her client.
There you go. And so there's that, and that's what's strange about the argument, right? Like that on one hand, well, I'm not being made aware of what's happening during discovery, but at the same time, it's almost proof that these conversations were happening because those conversations would have been tied to a lawyer's conversation with him about like, look, here's what the evidence is. It seems like I'm looking at this. It seems like it's very unlikely that we're going to prevail. If this goes to trial, I think our best option is to try to save your life, to get a plea agreement.
Yeah, and that's a reasonable.
That's not ineffective counsel. They saved his life. I mean,
Right.
he was definitely getting the death penalty outside of some unpredictable jury member, and I feel like, but that would have been something that I know the prosecutors there was some concern that if they went through a very lengthy trial, there's always the threat that no matter what case you're presenting, how strong it is, that there's that one person who you might get this just for whatever reason, just morally opposed to death penalty in any circumstance, and then you're back to life in prison, right? You're back to the same situation as if you just made the deal. And this would spare the victims of some of the family who some families were members were against the deal, some were for it. But it would at least spare them the extended process and allow the community to also begin to heal and not be stuck in this what will be a very long trial for a conclusion where the death penalty, for reasons that have nothing to do with the evidence, wasn't necessarily the guaranteed outcome.
Right. And, I think that in his situation, this is a warped way of looking at it, but
Mm.
maybe the death penalty would have been the best thing for him just because
Mm.
it would have got him out of a cell. He
Mhm.
could have gotten more attention. He could have appealed multiple times. And in some states, I'm not sure about Idaho, but
Mhm.
you get more privileges than
Yeah.
people that are not on death row.
Better access to more access to more technology in many
Right.
cases, to more all sorts of things. So
Yeah, and so maybe life would have been better for him, but
Mhm.
if you're looking at the length of time that you stay alive,
Mhm.
which is, I think, the what his defense attorneys are looking at,
Mhm.
obviously, a life sentence removes the firing squad.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it just reminded me of I was talking with a friend of mine, um, Dr. Kimberlin,
Mhm.
Bill
Oh, yeah.
Kimberlin, about it.
He really knows these cases. Yeah.
Yes, and I was talking about death row, and he talks with Scott Peterson, who's on death row in California,
Mhm.
a couple times a month at least. And I was asking him about it, like, how are you treated, or how is he treated there? Is he getting into fights? Is he worried about his life? And he told me that he's only been in one fight while he's there, and that
Mhm.
was over pickleball.
Mhm.
They were playing pickleball, and Scott went for the ball and bumped into a guy, and the guy thought that Scott was, like, attacking him and punched him a couple times,
Hmm.
but that's it. And so, n each state's different, and I don't know of how life would have been for him, but, he made the choices that he made, and, I'm sure that personally, I would have loved to have seen a trial where we could have had some of these, questions answered, like
Yeah.
why he did this, why did he target the 4 victims,
Mhm.
and there's some curiosity too of, like, where did he throw the knife, and little things like that that aren't really important, but
Right.
the if you look at this from what's best for the victims' families in this case,
Mhm.
I don't think that putting them through a longer process
Mhm.
would have been necessarily better. I'm sure that they would also want some answers.
Mhm.
Um, and so you've got that weighted decision to make. Is that worth hearing about of how your loved one was murdered?
And I'm sure they have more access to information than we do because they did the scans of his computers and phones and so forth. But I'm also curious about if these were his only crimes. So
Yeah.
were these crimes the result of an escalating behavior towards women, which we've seen reports of this. I mean, this has been well covered. We don't have to rehash all of this, but there have been reports about the way he responded negatively to like female authority figures. He was very there was aggressive acts towards women, both that were his students on campus and others, and some faculty members as well. And so, what I'm wondering is was the escalation, was this the first major escalation, which was the death of multiple people at one time in this kind of mass murder, right? That he's engaging in over one night, or is it possible that there was some other crime that he was responsible for that we just don't know about just yet. And And I only ask that because I'm not really in any position with the with anything. I'm not suggesting there is, but I just haven't. I'm assuming people have looked into this question some.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I have those same questions of it puts a lot of doubt in my mind that you would pick your first murder to be 4 people
Right.
in a house. Like that just seems to me that either A, it didn't go like you planned and you
Right.
thought you could go in and there was one victim that
Entirely
you were
possible.
targeting
Mhm.
and life did not work out the way that you planned it and you ended up engaging these other 3 victims, or you got there and something happened,
Mhm.
whether that's someone coming out of the room and or you just felt that much more empowered after killing the first person
Mhm.
that you decide I something could have there's multiple ways that that could have happened. But yeah, it does just I've got the same curiosities of what else has he done?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we probably won't know that.
Well, when those trips that he would make across the country, going back home to Pennsylvania, Washington State, we know that for a fact because we have the body cam footage when he was stopped that first time he went back after these murders. His father drove him back across the country, and he was pulled over multiple times. He was under surveillance at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just wondering if had he made that trip at other points by himself or even crimes around that region? Is there anything that looks remotely like this that's open and unsolved that he could potentially be attached to? So it's one of those that we'll never know, and I think it's one of those questions unless he were to dangle it in front of people. But right now, the story he's telling is that he's innocent, which is just absurd. So I think we're less likely to get that story. But it would be interesting when he decides to actually speak more openly about this, what that was. I tend to agree with you that it seems like this could be a situation where a lot of things went wrong that he couldn't have planned for. But the only thing that gives me pause with that is that we know from some of the camera footage that he was in the GPS tracking that he was engaging in a lot of surveillance of his house. So he likely
Yes.
had a reasonable expectation of the numbers of people that were typically in the house or the kind of comings and goings. And it's hard to imagine that based on that surveillance, he wouldn't think that there was a high probability that he would run into other people during the commission of the crime. And if
Right.
that's the case, then why would he engage a crime with the potential of having to confront so many people where things can go sideways pretty quickly when people were fighting for their life and that's multiple people that you're having to control? And it's your first time.
Yeah, and that's where I think the arrogance comes in,
Mhm,
and again, this just complete speculation on my part, but just
mhm,
sharing my thoughts is that we do know that his vehicle is seen multiple times where it appears to be like he's waiting for an event to happen, like the lights to
mhm,
go out or whatnot. He he also, or it's been reported that the back door to the house
mhm.
was left open because it was more or less like a party house and people would
Right.
come and go. And this is a small college community, so people felt
Sure.
safe.
Sure.
And so if he was able to walk in, and I think that this was not his first time being in that house personally,
Mhm, mhm,
um, that he may have just had that much confidence
mhm,
that and maybe that was part of the thrill for him was
mhm,
to sneak into the house and try to commit a murder without being noticed while there's people there.
mhm,
And this isn't the first time these type of things have happened.
mhm,
When we look at, the Golden State Killer, he did things like choosing his victims were female, but he would
mhm.
choose victims that would have a male home because part of his thrill was that he would tie the male up and stack dishes on them
Right.
while he was assaulting and murdering the female.
Mhm.
And so it was all part of the way that he got off is the easiest way to say it. And so maybe that was part of it. I don't know. I'm not an
Mhm.
expert in this thing,
Yeah.
but I would love to know. It would be nice if this was like with the Long Island serial killer Rex Huberman, where he
Mhm.
was required to meet with the FBI's behavioral unit.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
that would have been great
Yeah.
because then we'd actually be able to learn and to find out what really happened and hopefully some of his thought process on this.
And really, if he wants a lot of attention, then I mean, if he wanted to come forward and give like some if it was possible for him to give an honest discussion of his thought process and all of this type of stuff, I'm sure he'd have a lot of people listening. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
it would, but I think it's one of those things. I mean, Ted Bundy did the same thing. If we're drawing a comparison, Ted Bundy was executed, but Ted Bundy claimed his innocence for a very, very long time. And then when it really got close to his execution time, he started trying to buy himself more time by saying he would cooperate. And there were so many more people they didn't know about, and like that was the tactic. And I guess with Kohberger, there's not really, since the death penalty was taken off the table during the plea, there's not really a lot of incentive for him to talk at this moment because so little was said and so little from of what his defense would have been. We never really got a real preview of that. Had it gone to trial, it seems like these little tidbits that he'll throw out there, anytime he decides to communicate in any way, it becomes a kind of news cycle event, at least.
Right. And maybe he just needs to marinate in that cell a little longer. And then after
So
5 or 10 years, he'll come around to the fact that, oh,
yeah,
people have forgotten about him
yeah,
and that, maybe he will want to talk then and give some type of detail uh, or motive or answer questions. But then again, it's like, is it really that important? Because are you going to believe what he says anyway? Probably not.
right. Yeah, I think at this point, and this is part of the thing that the argument he's making is very cynical in the sense that it requires us to ignore just basic things that we know about him. You can't pretend that you're someone who's just like, incompetent and taken advantage of by your lawyer when you were studying to have an expertise in this same area. So, and as we've touched on this before, but the threshold for incompetent counsel is or ineffective counsel is incredibly high. I mean, it's essentially, your lawyer better have been like, maybe your lawyer was so drunk they were essentially incapacitated and weren't able to register objections or other things. Like, it'd have to be something close to that level. It's not that your lawyer you have buyer's remorse, which I think is a good way to think about it, about your lawyer's strategy, or you question things that your lawyer said, or you are, in retrospect, not happy with it. You can have an attorney that's not very good at all, and that's not ineffective defense. Someone can have a sincerely bad strategy. I mean, look at Richard Allen's
Right.
attorneys. It was he had a lot of really bad, a really crazy strategy that they adopted, and guess what, that's not ineffective counsel. It's just that's the hand you decide to play, and
Yeah.
it's everyone gets their shot. You've got to, if you are not an incompetent person yourself, and he certainly is not, Bryan Kohberger, like, you have to be, you can petition to have your attorney changed if you thought they were so incompetent. So
Right.
yeah,
And this is so you've got a year from your you've got a year from your conviction to file the post-op. And I mean, this is something that he filed himself.
yeah,
And so, like we're saying, the odds are very slim. And then you've got
almost effectively
someone,
zero.
right,
So
that is essentially filling out like a worksheet and writing an extremely short narrative without giving any case law or any detail
yeah.
um, in any of this. So he's not getting a new trial. Let's say
And
that.
And this is kind of what everybody does at this post conviction process. I mean, Richard Allen did the same thing with Delphi, right? I know that's there. Richard Allen does have those like vocal supporters who are conspiracy theorists and stuff out there. I don't know that we have that with Bryan Kohberger. I know there's some, but do you get the sense that there's a segment of any size whatsoever that just desperately believes he was framed as innocent?
I have not seen it. Maybe it'll come out in the comments on the show.
If you think he's innocent, like please post a comment. So we
I
would
mean,
love to.
we did
I
a
want to know who
show,
these people are. So
right? I did a show on Richard Ramirez a long
yeah.
time ago,
Uh-huh.
and there was a few people that commented on that saying that he was not guilty and he was set up and blah blah blah. It's like, yeah, right. But there's going to be people out there. So I'm sure that maybe he's got a handful,
Yeah.
but is there a significant group? I would be highly doubtful on that one.
Yeah. I mean, me too. So that's why I'm curious about who he imagines his audience is. Is it just a delusional self-importance where he imagines that, like it has become painfully obvious that justice or
Right.
whatever it was that he said, it was something Victorian sounding in his in his appeal. But like is it just it doesn't seem like it's the general people, or is he just talked himself into the fact that he has a legion of fans because someone posted something kind of crazy on Facebook or something that he saw?
Yeah. Well,
Is he able to comment on social media? Does he engage people at all, like outside of that thing he sent to the reporter?
sorry, I was reading in the comments here. We've got Seth in the chats here. We just did a
Seth, good
show
to see
not
you.
too long ago,
Yeah.
and he asked, "Do you have any thoughts on the Lindsay Clancy case?" Um, you know what? We will
We
look at that case, and we may be doing one on it.
yeah.
But yeah,
It's an interesting case. I'm not an expert on this case by any stretch of the imagination, but I do know some people who have some ties to it. So, and so we can. I know someone who was mentored by the person who is the defense expert that they are calling in that case. So there's
we were
we'll
actually
probably
talking about this right before the show started about having her on as a guest. So,
more
um,
more to come with that. Yeah, just keep
yes,
an eye on it. We'll probably touch on it. It's one that's getting a little bit more attention. Um, right now. There's a few like that. And so I'm sure we will kind of circle back around to it. It is I don't think we've peaked with the media coverage of that case. I think people are really starting to kind of take a look at it. There's been major stories written in a number of different outlets, and there's very few experts that are out there. So um, I can give her a small plug. Clara Lewis, who wrote a book called American Infanticide, she's one of only like 5 experts in the United States on this topic. So was a peer of mine in graduate school. So it was it's a really interesting case. So we'll probably do something with it. And in terms of and I think this speaks to just how little there is to say about Mr. Kohberger as well, is that it feels like this petition. Oh, something I was going to say with the petition. You mentioned just the aesthetics of the petition, written in kind of like looks like something somewhat like a high schooler wrote for their homework. It is interesting too. It seems there's this like commanding language that he's using that feels very confident, but it looks like scrawl in a worksheet, and so it doesn't look.
yeah,
That contrast is less than convincing too.
and that's kind of my thought on that too. Is that this is I hereby say he is not going to win that argument there.
Yeah. I hereby announce we will reach out to Bryan Kohberger for comment. So
yes.
we will see what he wants to offer us. If he would like to offer us any rhetorical flourishes that clarify some of the claims that he made earlier in his very, very, very short brief.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. His handwritten brief.
His handwritten petition or whatever it is. So yeah.
I would like to hereby invite you to buy a copy of our book. A Murder on Campus, A Professor, the Cop, and North Carolina's Most Notorious Cold Case.
Mhm.
That book was written by Dr. Bryan Santana and myself. You can buy that on Kindle, Kindle, Barnes and Noble, Audible, Amazon, anywhere where you can buy a book. Dr. Bryan, would you like to tell them about your other book that's going to be coming up?
Yeah, so I'm closing in on this book. I'm still working on this, but we are very far along now at this point, at least in the manuscript. This is A Murder in Nicefield, the Deborah Elizabeth Espy story. This is under contract with the History Press, and this is a case that was administratively closed from 1973, and it is a wild story about the investigation and the aftermath of all those who were involved. The book does feature interviews with both the family of Elizabeth Espy and the family of Dennis Murphy, the individual who is ultimately officially named as the offender in this case. And so keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, visit bryansantanaauthor.com, pick up a copy of A Murder on Campus, and we would love to hear your thoughts. If you read A Murder on Campus, please reach out. Reach out through the website. It's on there. Join my mailing list. Send me an email about it. Reach out on Instagram at True Crime Professor. We'd love to hear about any of your thoughts on the Virginia Olsen case and or our book.
Yeah, and we just did a show with Seth there on his show, so make sure you check that out. If you want to support the show, you can start off by liking and subscribing to Santana True Crime. You can also find me on Instagram and other forms of social media at Santana True Crime. Feel free to send me a case that you would like us to cover, and or you can leave one in the comments. Dr. Bryan, thank you so much, and thank you for all that joined us. Good night.
Not everyone.